Here is the desk setup for this session. Just a quick visual to give you an idea of what I plan to work with. I'll talk about tools and supplies throughout the video. This time the focus is less on tangents and more on my art processes and the thinking behind them. So this isn't the first time my preliminary practice sketch looked better than the one for game day, and I was tempted to scrap it and start over. But then I thought, well, let's see if I can salvage it through the magic of gouache. In the early stages, I like to add an ink layer. It helps me to keep track of the design as I paint, since the first wash or two of color can obscure the pencil work. In this case, I used Noodler's Lexington Gray, a lovely shade recently added to my ink collection thanks to a kind viewer. I didn't want to use a stark black, but I needed something that would be pretty much waterproof, and Lexington Gray fit the bill. There was a little mishap there that was entirely due to user error, because I was fiddling with the filling mechanism. This is the Yongsheng brush fountain pen. It was featured in a previous video, and I enjoyed it so much that I used it again for this project. You just dip the bristles into your ink and turn the knob on the other end to fill up the reservoir. The lines it lays down are not too dry and not too wet. It's still early days, and I'm keeping my eye on it for any possible issues, such as leakage or crusting, but so far it works like a dream. Of course, it's always a good idea to have tissues on hand, because arting can be messy. I'll take this moment to apologize because there are a few times where action took place outside of the frame, resulting in a couple of abrupt transitions. You'll notice that with the crow during the painting segment, since one moment he hadn't been touched, then the next he's totally done. Why did I choose this subject? I prefer cooler temperatures, and I guess I just wanted a touch of autumn in July. Yeah, I can draw a mean pumpkin, but birds, not so much. I had to just wing it and hope for the best. New England in the fall has been on my mind lately. I've never been there, but I'd love to experience it, especially if clam chowder and lobster rolls are involved. So, because of the crow, which is similar to a raven, this design makes me think of Edgar Allan Poe. Did you know there's a place called the Annabel Lee Tavern? It's in Baltimore, Maryland. And although their website seems to be in transition, they are active on Facebook. And of course, I was able to feed my foodie dreams with drool-worthy images on their Yelp page. But let's talk about gouache. I'm using Holbein's Artist Gouache, and my set has 12 colors. For this project, I used 8 of those. Permanent yellow deep, lemon yellow, flame red, permanent green deep, ultramarine deep, burnt sienna, ivory black, and permanent white. First, I laid down a wash just to get the base tone down, something to build on top of. I had used quite a bit of water, but there's still loads of color there. Apparently, there's a ton of pigments in these paints. You can take a little bit and it will go far, like magic. Normally, I associate that quality with watercolors, because of their delicate transparency and unpredictable movement. But I was determined to find some sort of magic in this flat as a flapjack paint medium. Gouache, darn it. One of the reasons I make the first layers so thin is because I want to see the sketch through it, so I know where to go with the next layers. Another reason is, and I've heard this from some other gouache painters, thin underlayers dry quicker and are less likely to accidentally reactivate. Whereas if you've got a thick layer down and you come in with more paint or a wet brush, you're going to pick up some of the paint that's there, and it's going to mix in with what you're trying to put on top. It can cause issues and potentially create a mess, so I try to keep that in mind while I'm painting. Here I started on the pumpkin with a mid-tone, or maybe it's more of a dark to middle value. That was to solidify the shape of that object, to help me focus on that particular space. Then I lightened and brightened that color by mixing in a bit more yellow and a smidge of red. That was used for the main body of the pumpkin. Now, the brush I was using there is a number 6 round snap. I do like the snap brushes. I've yet to experiment with different brushes with gouache. For now, these are working for me. Unfortunately, I don't have any flat brushes from the Snap series, but I do have a couple from the lower grade Real Value line, and they're doing the job for now. All of those are from Princeton, by the way, and have synthetic bristles. For the next gouache project, perhaps I'll see how the Neptunes or the Aqua Elites handle this stuff. I'm just trying to stick with what I have and what I know for now, and maybe experiment with other options down the road. By the way, another Edgar Allan Poe themed establishment is a restaurant in South Carolina called Poe's Tavern. Apparently, Poe had spent some time there on Sullivan's Island, and now you can go there and enjoy Edgar's Drunken Chili and a Rue Morgue burger. That's it for this particular tangent, I promise. On the subject of layers, the pumpkin looks pretty good there, although the color is darker than what I normally associate with pumpkins. But I was thinking about building from middle to light for this part, because I do come in later with 1, maybe even 2 more layers, and it takes on more character as that happens. So what you're seeing here is still in a state of flux. That's true for much of the project, actually. Once again, laying down a solid mix, this time for the, I'm going to call it wheat. Well, my version of wheat in any case. But don't get attached to that tan color because it's going to change drastically. Unfortunately, while painting the crow, it wasn't quite in frame. That's why there's a skip in action there. Crows are from the corvid family, which also includes ravens, magpies, jays, and others. You've got a phone. Google it if you must. But I wanted to mention it because people often mistake crows for ravens and vice versa. Although they share the same genus, there are subtle differences, from the sounds they make to the shape of their beaks, and even the fluff of their feathers. But both are found throughout North America. This was a bold decision here, this blue. I didn't really think it through. I mean, yeah, there's a touch of blue on the crow. It kind of looks black, but it's actually a mix of blue and black. So I figured bringing blue into play elsewhere might be good. And it looks like such a mess there. You may have heard the term ugly stage as applied to artwork. Yeah, I thought I'd ruined it. I really thought, oh no, what did I do? This was one of those instances where once it dried, it was actually okay. But the nice thing about gouache is you can go back in and change things. whether by reactivating the paint that's already there and moving it around, or adding another layer to cover it up. I'm still trying to figure out this medium, so I was just experimenting, really. I think we've all had those moments when we just want to chuck the whole thing across the room, go play Animal Crossing for an hour, then come back and start an entirely different new piece. But I find that, in most cases, sticking with a project pays off in the end. It might not be 100% satisfying, but man, the things you learn. For instance, the next time I do a background treatment like this, I might want to use a bigger brush or a flat one. Gosh, there's so much I want to try with this medium. It just seems like I haven't even begun to really understand it, which is funny because I consider it to be a simpler, less challenging form of watercolor. I mean, I've been playing with watercolors for about 4 or 5 years, and I still struggle with it at times. Wait, what was my point? I guess I'm saying that while gouache is definitely different from watercolors, at this point, I'm becoming a bit engrossed in it. With the pumpkin, I wanted to experiment with another painting technique. I believe this is called tiling, where you place your colors in short strokes to form your shapes and shadows. It's new to me, and perhaps I don't completely grasp it, but I like the results. I think tiling is the correct term. I'm going to go with it anyway, make it sound like I knew what I was doing. Here's where I changed things up with the wheat. The tan color wasn't working, so I tried a mixture of green. I actually ended up trying various treatments until stumbling across something I liked. Just briefly returning to the topic of tiling, I want to direct you to a really good video on the Watts Atelier of the Arts channel. The video is titled, "What's Tiling?" I wish it was more detailed in its explanation of what tiling is, but plenty of pre-done example pieces in gouache are shown. The link to that video will be in the description. This paper is cold-pressed watercolor paper, but it's not a highly textured cold press. I was going to try and stick with hot pressed, just so I wouldn't have to deal with textures in my gouache paintings. But this Fluid 100 has actually a relatively smooth surface, so I chose it for this project and was pretty happy with it. I mean, I have no complaints. Well, except for the complaint I always have with Fluid 100 watercolor paper, and that's that it tears when I remove the tape. Every time. I have two kinds of tape that I use. One from Dollar Tree that's sort of a low-tack masking tape, and the other is this one, the blue painter's tape. None of my other papers have a problem with these, but I suppose I'll have to get the special low-tack painter's tape just for Fluid 100. Man, talk about art divas. Here I was trying to soften the latest paint strokes. I could have taken things further and blended it in more, but at the time that wasn't my goal. I wanted the look of the strokes, just not too ragged. This mix is not black. I know it looks pretty dark, but it was a combination of red and black, maybe a smidge of brown. There are actually a lot of crows in our neighborhood. It's a jarring way to wake up, I tell you, especially if the last thing you remember is falling asleep to a soothing ocean wave ambiance video. You definitely know when a bird of prey is around because the crows get extra raucous, and you haven't really been side-eyed until you've been side-eyed by a crow. This looked good to me. I could imagine where the painting could go if I continued with this style. Once the pumpkin was lined out like that, I was pretty happy. And here again, I was trying something different with the wheat. It was okay. I could live with it. And again, the line work started to make it all look good. I think that's because the styles I lean toward are illustrative and cartoony rather than realistic. I don't know how to draw crows, so it was basically a silhouette. But I did eventually go back in to add some interest. Not exactly details, just some abstract shadow effects. It's not anatomically correct. This was a lot of fun, especially here. I was in the zone and just doing my thing, not thinking too much or having to make big decisions, because here it seemed to be coming together, and I thought, yeah, I like how this is shaping up. That's the best part, the most fun. Yeah, I was feeling autumnal. I wanted some Halloween in July. I think it's too early for the onset of pumpkin spice season, though, according to coffee shops, that is. Doesn't that usually kick off around the end of August? But I have seen fall haul videos pop up over the past week, so autumn merch is beginning to make its presence known. You can see that I changed my mind on the shape of the stem. The lines I'd placed earlier in Lexington gray ink are still faintly visible, but I'm glad I changed it. The other shape was just odd. There are some famous artists that worked in gouache, if not exclusively, at least enough to be of note. Toulouse-Lautrec, Henri Matisse, Kobe Whitmore, and James Gurney, to name a few. In fact, James Gurney, who is known for his Dinotopia book series, is accessible online through his website and various social media outlets. From what I've seen of his YouTube content and from following his Twitter account, he appears to be pretty open about his techniques. Also, YouTuber Mary Sanchez has some helpful gouache content, so check her out as well. Links will be in the description. You know the drill. The crow was looking a little too flat. That's why I added some lighter gray. The other day, I was treated to homemade chocolate cake, thanks to my good friend Gail. It was to celebrate Inkworks reaching 1,000 subscribers. We've known each other for probably 40 years now, and she's been a supporter of this channel since the beginning, with both encouragement and the occasional Ko-fi donation. I don't often bring it up, so I'll take this opportunity to say thank you to those viewers who've chosen to support this channel with a donation through Ko-fi. It is very much appreciated. In fact, to show my appreciation, I'm going to share the recipe for that cake here. Well, it's available online, so I'll add a link below. It's called Wacky Cake. Now, during the Depression years, which was mainly the 1930s, certain ingredients could be difficult to obtain, so this recipe was created, and it does not require eggs, butter, or milk. No, I'm not saying my friend and I lived through the Great Depression. It's one of those things that's been passed down for generations, and now it's all over Pinterest. There are minor variations, but the main gist is the same. No eggs, butter, or milk, while some form of vinegar is added. It's moist and delicious and perfect with a cup of coffee. You're welcome. The wheat just wasn't working for me, so I decided to make the behind stalk darker to provide some contrast. So I still consider the front one to be wheat, while the one behind is more like leaves. It was a little confusing figuring out which pieces belong to which, actually, but it's cool to be able to make those changes. That's not something you can do with watercolor. Yeah, you give up watercolor's transparency, but you gain the ability to use other techniques and create different effects. And I'm having fun with it. I mean, look at this. I went in with a wet brush, reactivated some of the paint that was there in the background, and softened the strokes that were bugging me. Wow, who knew you could do that? So, yeah, those were some of my thoughts during the whole process with this project. Sure, there are things I would do differently, but on the whole, I'm happy with the end result. And does that not look as if the pumpkin is bleeding out? That wasn't intended. Too much red in the mix, I guess. I'm happy to share my second gouache painting. Some things were learned on my end, for sure. Hopefully, you got something out of it as well. Until next time, stay artsy, my friends.